The film opens during the First Gulf War, where American soldiers are tasked with evicting the Iraqi army from Kuwait. The Iraqis set fire to all the crude oil wells as they retreated. Lieutenant Colonel Nathaniel Serling is the commanding officer, and he begins his mission with a quick prayer along with his team. Once in the field, the soldiers start their attack from their tanks, but it's too foggy to identify the enemy troops. Colonel Serling tries to get a clear shot at them, but unfortunately, he accidentally misidentifies and destroys one of his own tanks during the confusing nighttime battle, killing his friend, Lieutenant Boylar. Lieutenant Boylar's tanks had taken up the first flank, while Serling led the center column. While many enemy tanks are destroyed, one batch hides behind the dunes and starts attacking just as Boylar's flank tanks come alongside them. In the night battle, Serling is unable to distinguish friend from foe and fires on all tanks in front of him. Boylar was firing at the enemy tanks, but Serling's pilot thinks that they were firing at the US tanks, which identifies them as the enemy, which includes Boylar's.
I heard you, what?
You just let up Boiler, goddammit!
The following day, the soldier who fired the shot is overwhelmed with guilt. Colonel Serling reassures him, saying the blame isn't his to bear, and he was simply following orders. Back in the United States, Serling faces an inquiry about his actions, where he recounts the events that transpired in the field. Prepared to face the consequences of his decisions, Serling is prompted by the interviewing sergeant to confirm that, given the smoky conditions of the night, he couldn't distinguish between the tanks. The United States Army, however, opts to cover up the incident, awarding Serling a medal for bravery and assigning him to a desk job. Despite the accolades, Serling is haunted by the incident and attempts to write a letter of deep condolence to Boylar's family. Before he can finish, he receives a call from Tony Gartner, a Washington Post reporter, seeking a comment on his war record, particularly the Boylar incident. Unappreciative of the intrusion, Serling abruptly ends the call without providing any comment. Later, Serling attends a meeting with fellow soldiers to determine if Captain Karen Emma Walden should become the first woman to posthumously receive the Medal of Honor. Walden had commanded a medevac Huey helicopter sent to rescue the crew of a downed Black Hawk helicopter. First Lieutenant Shelley, who was in the downed Black Hawk, describes how they were stranded on a ridge surrounded by enemy forces and attacked by a tank. 2 crew members were killed, and another, Sergeant Egon, lost his leg. Soon, they heard a medevac helicopter approaching for rescue. Walden's crew destroyed the enemy tank by dropping a fuel bladder on it and igniting it with a flare gun. But their helicopter was shot down shortly after. The 2 crews couldn't unite. The medevac was caught in the crossfire between the enemy and the Black Hawk crew throughout the night. When the survivors were rescued the next day, Walden was reported dead. The Black Hawk crew noted that the medevac crew returned fire with an M16 during the rescue, indicating that someone left behind was still alive. Later, A-10 Thunderbolts dropped napalm on the downed helicopters. Bruno, a White House aide, urges Serling to conclude the inquiry quickly so that Walden can be awarded the medal on Veterans Day. However, General Hirschberg, Serling's superior, insists that the full truth behind Boylar's death remain concealed. Serling is determined to uncover the truth so that he can be honest with Boylar's parents. At home, Serling has dinner with his family, but his thoughts are consumed by guilt over Boylar's death. The phone rings, and when his wife informs him that it's someone named Gartner, Serling immediately ends the call without answering. He retreats to another room and pours himself a drink. Sensing his distress, his wife checks on him, but Serling insists he's fine and begins packing for a trip. He explains that he'll be investigating Walden's worthiness for the Medal of Honor and will be away for several days. His wife doesn't protest and allows him to leave. As Serling begins his investigation, he quickly notices discrepancies in the testimony of Walden's crew. Warrant Officer 1A, Ratty, the co-pilot, was injured early in the mission and claims that Walden ordered the fuel bladder to be dropped on the tank and ignited with a flare gun. Shortly afterward, their helicopter came under enemy fire and went down. Ratty, having lost consciousness, couldn't recall what happened next and awoke 3 days later on a hospital ship. After interviewing Ratty, Serling continues to drink, now openly at a bar. He strikes up a conversation with someone at the counter, and they briefly discuss army life. However, when the man man introduces himself as Tony Gartner, Serling becomes angry and attempts to leave. Gartner urges him to at least provide Boiler's family with an account of the death. This interaction exacerbates Serling's guilt, and his cowardice haunts him that night. He tries once more to write to Boiler's family, but is unable to do so. That night, he suffers a nightmare in which he sees Boiler's family burning in agony, struggling to survive. When he wakes up, he numbs the pain with another shot of alcohol. His investigation continues the next morning when he investigates specialist Andrew Ilario, the medic who was on Walden's team. He praises Walden strongly. He says that after the chopper went down, Walden asks Monfries to set up a perimeter while Ilario tended to an injured Ratty. Walden led the crew through the night, keeping them on 2-hour watches and conserving ammo. Walden was hit during an enemy raid, which they repelled successfully, but they all got injured somehow. Walden continued to guide her team until the morning when the enemy attacked their position consistently. That's when the rescue arrived for them, and Walden stayed behind, waiting for a stretcher. The rest of the crew went to the helicopter for rescue. However, before they could come back for Walden, she died due to an explosion, and Ilario watched her lay lifeless. As the others got into the chopper, Monfries told the rescue chopper that Walden was dead, and it took off and ordered the napalm drop. Colonel Serling hears Ilario's point of the story and has some questions about it. He asks him about the M16 ran out of ammo, and Ilario confirms that the M16 ran out of ammo in the morning before the main attack began. Serling is confused because, according to the rescue chopper, he says he heard the M16 being fired during the rescue. For now, he doesn't further question Ilario about it and just asks whether he has sent Walden's letter to her parents. Ilario asks a bit shady about his words, but once again confirms he sent the letter to her parents. Soon, Colonel Serling visits Walden's parents and expresses his condolences. Walden also has a daughter named Anne-Marie. Walden's father, Joel Walden, also tells Serling that Major Teagarden was the one who came to inform them of their daughter's death and provided them with a picture of her crew. However, it's shortly revealed that the Walden family never received their daughter's letter from Ilario. We then see Serling back at his superior, Hirschberg's office, where he is there to report his progress. Despite Serling's suspicions about the crew's testimony, Hirschberg tells him to wrap up the decision on whether Walden is worthy of the Medal of Honor. This time, Colonel Serling firmly speaks up and says someone has to be responsible for Boiler's death and that he wants to give his word to Boiler's parents. However, Hirschberg wants this matter buried. So, he sits Serling down and expresses that he too lost a friend in battle. He tells Serling to leave it out of his conscience and stop his drinking habit. Hirschberg knows that Serling is becoming an alcoholic and demands that he enter a program rather than fighting to take responsibility for Boiler's death. Serling leaves the office silently, but it's clear he feels uneasy. After that, he needs to wrap up Walden's case, so he visits another crew member, Staff Sergeant John Monfries. Monfries was on the mission along with Walden and the others, and he claims that Walden was a coward and that she led the crew in combat and improvised the fuel bladder weapon. He says the M16 ran out of ammo in the morning. Monfries was the one fighting through the night, while Walden was crying and took a shot during the enemy raid. She wanted to surrender and didn't want to put in the effort. During the rescue, Walden didn't think they could make it, so she refused to hop on the helicopter. Even fired a gun at him to leave her alone, and soon an explosive blew up too close to her, and she died tragically. Monfries claims this is what really happened, and that she wasn't a hero at all. Furthermore, Serling is still puzzled by the crew of the Blackhawk claiming that they heard firing from an M16, even though both Ilario and Monfries claimed it was out of ammo. That night, Serling gets carried away with his drinking and calls his wife drunk from a public telephone. She asks what really happened on the mission, but he refuses to tell her, talking only about the family. He is soon about to pass out in the hotel lobby, but is rescued by Tony Gartner, the reporter. This time, Tony just gives Serling the time to speak for himself. And finally, Serling vents that he is the primary individual who must testify about Boiler's death to his family, but that the US Army covered it up. Tony, for now, just gives his personal card to Serling and leaves him to his thoughts. The next day, Serling meets with Hirschberg and tells him this case needs more time to be investigated, as there are inconsistencies. Also, Ilario and another crew member, Alta Mayer, have gone missing, so he can't conclude his investigation. But Hirschberg claims that in no way and in any case should the woman be portrayed in a bad light. The president and the army community want the woman to receive the Medal of Honor for propaganda purposes. But Serling argues, with all due respect, that he can't confirm that. Hirschberg then decides to assign the case to another officer and tells Serling that he will be discharged dishonorably from his position in the army. Serling stands firm in his word and continues to investigate on his own. Soon, he calls and meets with Tony Gartner to help him track down both missing individuals. In exchange, he promises Tony a tape of the tank communications from the night when Colonel Boiler died. Tony tracks down Sergeant Stephen Altemeyer, who is dying in a hospital due to abdominal cancer. When Serling questions him, Altemeyer speaks in a scared manner about the napalm fire before upping his own medication and blacking out before answering Serling's questions. Serling then heads back to Monfrias and tells him he knows someone is hiding something in the story and that he knows it is sinister. Monfrias at first tries to talk his way out of it because he knows Serling has been removed from the investigation, but shortly agrees to take a ride with Serling. Meanwhile, he is drinking and speaking out of turn, but his anger soon bursts and he points his gun at Serling. He drives straight to the train tracks and forces Serling to get out of the vehicle at gunpoint, then brutally ends his own life by driving into the oncoming train. Serling is now more traumatized than ever, and he reviews the recordings he has so far to solve the case once and for all. He then tracks down Ilario to hear the final truth, but Ilario finally tells him everything. That night, after their helicopter crashed, Monfrias wanted to flee, which would mean abandoning Ratty. When Walden refused, he pulled a gun on her. Walden then shot an enemy who appeared behind Monfrias, but Monfrias thought Walden was firing at him and shot her in the stomach before backing off and handing his M16 to Walden. The next morning, the enemy attacked again as a rescue party approached. Walden decided to cover her men's retreat to the rescue chopper, firing an M16 at the enemies. Ilario didn't want to leave her, but she told him to come back with a stretcher and more guns. He ran towards the rescue, but once inside, Monfrias told the rescuers that Walden was dead, so they left without her. Napalm was then dropped on the entire area. Ilario and Altemeyer didn't dare to say anything except to flee from destruction with a guilty conscience.
She's dead!
Altemeyer tried to expose Monfrias' lie at all the time, but was too injured to speak, and Ilario was too scared of the court-martial Walden had threatened them with, so he remained silent. After Serling heard the whole truth from Ilario, he returned to the army. Later, Brigadier General Hirschberg is summoned by reporter Tony, who is there to confront him. Serling has secretly leaked the tapes of the night that Boiler died, and Hirschberg doesn't look happy about it. The tapes reveal that after Boiler died, Serling displayed leadership by asking all friendly tanks to turn on their lights so they could identify the enemy tanks and shoot at them. The gambit worked, and all enemy tanks were destroyed. Serling then moves forward and presents his final report about Walden's Medal of Honor to Hirschberg. Soon, a grand ceremony is held at the White House, and Walden's young daughter, Anne-Marie Walden, receives the Medal of Honor. Only Serling isn't present. He has gone to confront his own problems. He puts on his honorable uniform and heads to Boiler's family. He tells them the truth about the manner of their son's death and says he cannot ask for forgiveness. The Boilers tell Serling he must release his burden at some point and grant himself their forgiveness. With his conscience now cleared, Serling returns to his beloved family and embraces his wife. In the final moments, Serling has a flashback to when he was standing by Boiler's destroyed tank and a medevac Huey was lifting off with his friend's body. Serling suddenly realizes that Walden was the Huey pilot, and he grants her a graceful farewell. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.